Welcome back to another edition of the Quick Bricks NBA DFS podcast. This is your December 11th, 2019 edition. Of course, brought to you by the good guys over at Fantasy Degens. As always, I'm Sean Mitchell at smitchell17 on Twitter. Hopefully everybody's had a good start to the week. It is Tuesday. We have an 11-game slate, pretty big slate, lots to talk about, short time to get there, so let's go ahead and get started. Rockets at the Cavs, Houston minus 11.5, 228 on that total. One of the highest totals on the board so far, looks like third highest. Houston coming in as the second fastest team over the last five, Cleveland 26, so a massive pace-out spot here for Cleveland. We know Cleveland is not very good. They've been getting blown out about every game, so keep that in mind whenever you're looking to play Westbrook, Harden, any of those guys on the Rockets. Celtics at the Pacers, Indiana minus 1.5 here. Small favorite at home, 211 on the total. Boston 25th over the last five in terms of pace. Indiana 20th. Lakers at the Magic. LA Lakers minus 6.5 here on the road, 212 on the total. Lakers coming in as the sixth fastest over their last five. They've been playing with a lot of pace lately. Orlando 19th, so a nice little pace-up spot here for Orlando. I like that game quite a bit. Clippers at Toronto. You get Kawhi's return to Toronto here. The Clippers come in as a 1.5-point road favorite. No total on the board at the current time. This one's a good one. Of course, the Clippers coming in as the fastest team over the last five in terms of pace. Toronto is ninth. So you have a massive pace game here. Good flow. Should see a really good, nice flow in this game. Hornets at the Nets, Brooklyn minus 10.5. The Hornets, of course, on a back-to-back here. 218 on the total. Charlotte coming in as the 28th, almost third to last, slowest team in the NBA over the last five. Brooklyn has fell as well to 18th over their last five. The Hawks also on a back-to-back going into Chicago to play the Bulls at the United Center. Chicago minus 5.5 here at home. 222 on that total. Nice total on this game. Atlanta 17th over the last five. Chicago 24th. Not exactly the pace spot that we would have hoped for, so I'm not exactly like going balls deep on that one as game stacks, as you probably like to think. Next game, Jazz at the T-Wolves. Utah minus 1.5 here on the road. 222 on that total. Utah 7th in terms of pace over their last five. Minnesota right outside the top 10 at 13th. This is a game that we're obviously going to look to target. A lot of good plays in that one. The Grizzlies going into the Suns, going into Phoenix to the desert to play the Suns at Phoenix minus 7.5 here at home. Next to highest total on the board at 232. Memphis 4th, Phoenix 5th. So you have the 4th and 5th fastest teams over the last five games. Both of these teams have been in the top 10 all year long, basically. Should be a really nice fast-paced game. You know, the Grizzlies got most of their pieces back. They got Morant back. They've got Jonas is playing well. That one's obviously a good game we're going to look to target. Not a really big spread on that one. Phoenix is minus 7.5, but I think Grizz can keep it fairly close. Thunder at the Kings. Sacramento minus 1.5 here at home. OKC 29th over their last five in terms of pace. Sacramento 23rd, so a really slow game there. There was not a total on that one for some reason. Pelicans at the Bucks. Here's your big total of the day. It's 234, highest on the board, but Milwaukee is a 13-point home favorite here. The Pelicans have not been playing really good lately. They are, however, ranked 8th in terms of pace over the last five. Milwaukee is 3rd. So, of course, we know these teams are going to run with pace. It's a massive pace-up spot for both teams. They both love to run with pace. So this is going to be a really fast-paced game. Pelicans don't play a whole lot of defense, so Giannis at 11K. I'm not really sure why his price went down, but I will gladly take it. It's not a good spot for the Pelicans, obviously. But they should get Favors back, which could be a little bit of help on the defensive side, I should say. So that one will be something kind of interesting. And then your final game, the late night hammer here, the Knicks on a back-to-back going into Golden State to play the Warriors. Golden State minus 5.5 here at home, 210 on the total. New York Knicks coming in as the 18th fastest over their last five. Golden State 26th. So, again, not really a fast-paced game there. Let's jump right into the positionals. Point guard, Russell Westbrook, 9.8. Last four, over 52 fantasy points, 52, 71, 51, 55 in his last four. He's put up a triple-double in his last three or four. 30.3% usage in his last three games. We're getting to see the old Russell Westbrook here. He's taking advantage. Hopefully he gets to see a good amount of minutes tonight, because against this Cavs team, he could literally put up another triple-double. But that is the worry, is the blowout. Devontae Graham, 8.3 on DraftKings. Brooklyn allowing the fourth most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last five. He's put up over 47 fantasy points in his last three or four. He's been carrying about a 28.6% usage rate over his last 5. So Devontae Graham's been playing really well lately. Of course, he's on a back-to-back going into Brooklyn, but I'm totally fine with him tonight. On the flip side, Spencer Dinwiddie at 8.1. You get a cheaper Spencer Dinwiddie here against Graham, and who's put up 38 or more in his last eight games. He's put up 38 or more at home. He's put up a 28.6% usage rate in his last 5 at home, and, of course, he gets Charlotte on a back-to-back here at home. Love Dinwiddie tonight at 8.1. D'Angelo Russell at 7.9. 34 minutes in his last game, put up 35 fantasy points. We get the Knicks here on a back-to-back in Golden State. He had a 27.5% usage rate over his last 3. So D'Angelo Russell is back to his full amount of minutes. He's going to start chucking up beans all the time again. You might as well go ahead and play DAR now while you can still get him under 8K. Ricky Rubio at 7.3 gets Memphis at home. Memphis allowing the 7th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. Just put up 44 last game against Minnesota. It was a little bit of a revenge game. Nonetheless, he's been playing really well at home all year long. Gets a nice little pace-up spot, of course, here. It's not really a pace-up spot, but nice flow in this game. Both teams running with a lot of pace. This is key Rubio game here. Of course, Morant has not been that good on defense all year. Give me some Rubio at 7.3. On the flip side, Ja Morant at 7.3 as well. Phoenix allowing the 6th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over their last 5. He played 28 minutes in his return, put up 42 fantasy points. So Morant is not limited. He's not being limited. Played 28 minutes. Hopefully he'll play 30 or so tonight. Typically, Rubio is a little bit better on defense at home, it seems. So I might play Rubio over Morant in that range, but I don't mind Morant either. Kyle Lowry at 7.1, 41, 42, 38, and 39 in his last 4 minutes-wise. He's played tons and tons of minutes over his last 4 games since he returned. Over 38 fantasy points in his last 4. Gets a nice little pace-up spot here, of course. So against the Clippers at home. He likely will draw Pat Bev, but, the dude's a triple-double threat almost any given night. So he's cheap. He's 7.1. Chris Paul at 7.1 as well. Sacramento allowing the 5th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. 35 or more in his last 2 on the road. 33 or more in his last 4 or 5 on the road. 23.2% usage rate in his last 5 on the road. CP3 is looking really good lately. Been playing really well. So I don't mind him at 7.1. I think a really nice buy low spot here is Eric Bledsoe at 6K. He's in one of the nut matchups of the night. He's getting the New Orleans team that is allowing the most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. Put up 30 fantasy points in his last game at home. And he's been struggling a little bit lately. It's more, since Middleton's been back, he's been stealing a lot of the usage. But this spot is just too good to pass up, and he's just too cheap. So Eric Bledsoe at 6K. Dennis Schroeder at 6K as well on, the backup for CP3. He's played 34 or more. He's played over 31 minutes in his last 3. He's put up 34 or more in his last 2 of 3 fantasy points. And again, Sacramento allowing the 5th most fantasy points to that point guard spot. 26% usage in his last 5 on the road. He is close to leading the team in that regard. He has been all year. Tomas Satoransky at 5.7. Get the Hawks on a back-to-back. We know the Hawks are not exactly that great against defending point guards. He's put up 36.3 and 37.5 in his last 2 of 3 at home. Tomas has been playing really well. Satoransky at 5.7 is a decent look. If you want to go cheapy, Darius Garland at 4.2. Pace-up spot here against Houston, of course. It is Cleveland, but Houston's allowing the 9th most fantasy points to that point guard spot over the last 5. 28 or more minutes in his last 5 of 6. He has shown a little bit of flash. He has a couple 30-point fantasy point games. It's a total gamble. It's a total flyer GPP play. George Hill at 3.5. Again, New Orleans allowing the number 1 fantasy points to the point guard spot. He's played 16 and 21 minutes in his last 2, and he's put up over 20 fantasy points in his last 4 of 6. If you need to go there, he's there at 3.5K. Shooting guard, James Harden. Don't have to extend too much, but he's almost 13,000 tonight. Cleveland versus shooting guards has been a thing for as many years as I can remember. 32.9% usage rate in his last 5 on the road. Over 52 in his last 2. Over 70 in 2 of his last 3 on the road. We know Harden's good. Will he play? We've seen him play. We've seen him play big minutes, even in blowouts. So it's up to you, but I think I'm going to go Giannis over Harden tonight. Donovan Mitchell is probably one of my favorite plays at the price. Minnesota number 3 versus that point guard. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the point guard spot over the last 5. 9th most to the shooting guard spot. Donovan's been playing a little bit of both since Conley is out. We get point D Mitch here at home. He's averaging 38.6 fantasy points. I'm sorry, he's on the road. Averaging 38.6 fantasy points on the road, 28.8% usage on the road as well over his last 5. Donovan Mitchell, a big fan. Drew Holiday at 7.1 gets a nice pace game here. We know that Lonzo is not in the rotation. I mean, he's in the rotation, but he got 20 minutes last game coming off the bench. He's struggling. He's not playing well. Drew Holiday is going to benefit. He's only 7.1. We're getting basically Drew Holiday playing 35 minutes, 38 fantasy points in his last game. He's averaging 35.8 fantasy points on the road. It's just, he's cheap. He's playing 35-plus minutes most games. Drew Holiday is a good spot. Terry Rozier at 7.1, over 36 fantasy points in his last 2 on the road. He's averaging right under 32 for the road in all road games at 31.9, and he has right around a 24% usage rate in his last 5 on the road. Terry Rozier in Brooklyn, I'm totally fine with. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at 6.6, over 37 fantasy points in his last 3. Over 37 in his last 2 on the road. Over 34 fantasy points in his last 3 on the road, and he's garnering right around a 25.2% usage rate in his last 5 in the road. Sacramento allowing the 7th most fantasy points to that shooting guard spot over their last 5. So it's a good spot for SGA. He's coming alive lately. He's been putting up over 35 fantasy points mostly in his last 3. He's been, I guess he's building up some confidence. I don't know, but he's been playing well. So Alexander is fine there. Lou Williams, I think the price is just too cheap at 5'9". I know Kawhi's back. I know it's in Toronto. But, he was 2 of 19 last game. He went 0 of 5 from the three-point line. This should be a nice bounce-back game for him. And, of course, it's a nice pace game. So, Lou Will at 5'9", I think, is one of those tournament plays you can look at. Alec Burks at 5.8, 30 minutes or more in his last 9 games. 30 minutes last game, 41.3 fantasy points. I was on him last game, really liked the spot. He was at home against the Bulls. Tonight, he gets the New York Knicks at home, who were on a back-to-back. And he has had a 23.8% usage rate in his last 3. The only person that has had a higher usage rate, of course, it was D'Angelo Russell at 29.7. So, Alec Burks at 5'8", totally fine with again. Garrett Temple at 5.5. If you're not noticing, I'm playing just about every net or saying that I like every net because Charlotte on a back-to-back. Charlotte's not very good on D. Excuse me. Also, Temple's been playing well. 5.5. He's averaging 35 minutes over his last 5 home games. He's put up 30 or more in his last 2 of 3 at home. Totally fine with Garrett Temple there. He's been playing really good. So, moving along, we have Ben McLemore at 5.4, 27 or more minutes in his last 5 games, over 29 fantasy points in his last 4 or 5. Of course, Cleveland versus guards it's been a thing. And no Austin Rivers to take away any minutes from him as well, so that helps. So Ben McLemore at 5.4, Joe Ingles at 5.3, Minnesota allowing the 10th most fantasy points to that shooting guard spot over the last 5. He's now played over 32 or over 27 minutes in his last 4. He's now put up over 32 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. Joe Ingles has been benefiting since Conley is out as well. Been playing good minutes, been seeing his usage rate is up. So Joe Ingles at 5.3, totally fine with here at home. Terrence Ross at 5K, 22 or more minutes in his last 5. He's really had about 22 or more minutes almost every game except but like 1 or 2 all year. That's his usual role. Coming off the bench, he's a scoring guard. He has put up 29 or more fantasy points in his last 4 or 5. To put that to perspective, 31, 29.3, 32, 19.1, and 31 fantasy points over his last 5. So Terrence Ross has been getting it done. He's at home tonight against the Lakers. I would expect him to try to show out. Cam Reddish at 4.2, played 23. I think he played closer to 26 minutes last night. 23 or more minutes in his last 4, 24.3 last game. Last night, over 24 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3. He just put up 40.3 in 3 games ago, so we know he has the upside. He is on a back-to-back. So be wary. Jordan Clarkson at 4.1 is one that is hard to nail. He just doesn't get the minutes. When he does, he puts up good numbers. Just like last game, 26 minutes, he put up 30 fantasy points. It is versus Houston. He could get run in the blowout. So at 4.1, I think Jordan Clarkson is a nice little stash play there. Small forward, Giannis at 11K. His price has dropped for some reason, almost $1,000. He has a nut matchup against New Orleans tonight in a huge pace game. I want all the honest. LBJ at 10.6 versus Orlando, 55-61 in his last 2. Don't really have to talk too much. He's really good. Kawhi returning to Toronto, 58 fantasy points last game against Washington. Toronto is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the small forward spot over their last 5. So Kawhi at 8.7. I would expect some revenge. Brandon Ingram at 7.8 had his price finally get back up. He was 7.1 last time, or 7.5, which was retarded. Just not a good price by DraftKings. He put up 45 fantasy points, gets another nice little pace up spot here. 28.3% usage rate in his last 5 on the road. Totally fine with Brandon Ingram. Buddy Hield at 7.1, over 41 fantasy points in his last 5 of 6. 26.8% usage rate in his last 5. He's averaging 36 fantasy points at home. Really like Buddy Hield. Andrew Wiggins, 7K, 38 or more in his last 5 of 6 as well. Well over 30 minutes per game. He's averaging 42.5 fantasy points at home. Gets Utah at home tonight, like Wiggins. Chris Middleton at 6.4, played 29 minutes last game. Very encouraging. Put up 40 fantasy points. Last 5, he's averaging 34 fantasy points over his last 5 games. 25.3% usage rate in his last 5. Chris Middleton is a play as well. Play on. John Isaac at 6.2. I don't think anybody will look at him tonight. Gets a nice little pace-up spot here against the Lakers at home. 26 or more in his last 2, 33.3 fantasy points last game. So if you're into that sort of thing, Jonathan Isaac is a decent look. Harrison Barnes at 5.9. OKC versus small forwards has been a thing. They've been struggling against them all year. He's put up over 30 fantasy points in his last 3, over 36 fantasy points in his last 2 of 3. So he's been getting it done, been playing loads and loads of minutes. Gordon Hayward still too cheap at 5.7. Started last game, he played 26 minutes, put up 27.3 fantasy points. And then it was a blowout. So needless to say, I'm sure he probably could have played more minutes. He had no restrictions, so he's still too cheap. Gets a good game tonight. In a good spot. So Hayward at 5.7, yeah, totally fine with. Joe Harris at 5.6, of course, going against Charlotte on that back-to-back, over 30 minutes a game. He's now put up over 32 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4 at home. Joe Harris, I'm totally fine with. Ariza at 4.5, 25 or more minutes in his last 4, over 25 fantasy points in his last 3 or 4. So Trevor Ariza has been playing really well since he returned as well. He's still 4.5K, playing 25, 26 minutes most nights. So totally fine with him. DeAndre Hunter just played 40 minutes last night, put up 42 fantasy points. They are on a back-to-back. He is 4.3K. So if you're into that, I'm totally fine with it as well. Power forward, Anthony Davis, 62 and 77 in his last 2. Don't really have to extend too much. He's only 10.4, but it is on the road. Up to you. PG at 8.4 has put up 63 and 53 in his last 2. Of course, it is Kawhi's return to Toronto, so not really sure how this is going to go. But PG at 8.4 has been absolutely killing it lately as well. Domantas Sabonis at 8.2, put up 56.5 last game for me as my roster monster. Over 45 in his last 4 or 5. He's put up a double-double in every single game except 1. The guy's just been he's just been an absolute train all season. Kelly Oubre at 6.9, pace up spot here against Memphis, of course. Nice flow, nice pace game. 31.5 and 48 fantasy points in his last 2 at home. Over 33 minutes in his last 5 of 6. So Kelly Oubre's playing lots of minutes, and he's been playing pretty good at home. So Kelly Oubre is there at home in that nice pace spot with the Memphis Grizz at home. Torian Prince at 6.6, of course, against Charlotte on a back-to-back. Over 31 fantasy points in his last 4, well over 30 minutes. Another guy that's playing lots of minutes, should see lots of run tonight. Decently priced at 6.6, and we know he's got the upside. Lauri Markkanen at 6.3, Atlanta on a back-to-back, Jabari defense, and he's put up over 25 fantasy points in his last 3 at home. Lauri Markkanen's been playing really well as well, so that's a really good spot at 6.3. Jaren Jackson Jr. at 6.3, over 30 fantasy points in his last 4, 26 or more minutes in his last 4. He's put up over 31 fantasy points in his last 3 on the road. Jaren Jackson Jr. is totally fine, of course, against Phoenix tonight. Bellisia at 5.9. I'm kind of worried about Bailey coming back and stealing his minutes, but nonetheless, he's put up 36 and 51 fantasy points in his last 2, 34 and 37 minutes in his last 2. So he's been playing lots of minutes. He's been playing really well. We see the upside, 51 fantasy point game. And, of course, he's at home tonight, gets a good spot. So Dario Saric at 5.9, of course, staying in that Memphis and Phoenix game. 36 and 38 fantasy points in his last 2, 32 or more minutes in his last 2 as well. He's played 32 minutes last 2 games. Saric is going to continue to see big minutes for him. And, of course, it's not a great spot, but at 5.9 and for the production he's had last 2 games, I'm totally fine with it. Serge Ibaka at 5.2, 31 and 9.2 in his last 2, over 24 in his last 4 or 5. He's getting back to his regular role, 20-ish, 22 or so minutes. He's played, I think, 18 or 19 last game, but he still put up 25.2 fantasy points. So Serge, yeah, I'm totally fine with Serge as well. Moving over to the center spot, Karl Anthony Towns, 10K. Put up 64-ish fantasy points against this same Utah team in Utah earlier in the season. Gets them at home now, and guess what? Utah is allowing the most fantasy points to the center spot over the last 5. Karl Anthony Towns, smash spot, maybe. Jonas Valanciunas at 7K. We know Phoenix struggles against centers, even with Baines back. Over 53 in his last 3 of 5. Jonas Valanciunas has been a beast. Jarrett Allen at 6.8. Charlotte versus centers is definitely a thing. 33 or more in his last 2 of 3 at home. He beasted this game last time, so totally fine with Jarrett Allen. Steven Adams at 6.5K. 38 or more in his last 4 of 5. Sacramento against centers has also been a thing, and he put up 42 last game. On the flip side, Rashawn Holmes at 6.3. OKC, the same thing. Steven Adams has not been that great on defense. 36 minutes, 38 fantasy points last game. He's put up over 32 fantasy points in just about every home game this year. So Rashawn Holmes at home is fine with me. Mitchell Robinson at 5.8. 23 or more minutes in his last 4. Over 31 fantasy points in his last 3 of 4. Golden State struggles against centers as well. So Mitch Robb on a back-to-back. Hopefully can see another 25, 27 minutes. So I'm totally fine with Mitchell Robinson. I wish his price was a little bit cheaper. Probably one of the more value centers on the slate, and I hate to say it because I hate playing him, but it's Marc Gasol at 5.2. We know the Clippers are not very good versus center spots. He's put up over 31 in his last 3 of 5, so he's been playing well, playing over 30 minutes a game pretty much, so you can't really knock it at 5.2. I think he's one of the best values at center on the slate. DeAndre Jordan at 5K just put up 41.8 fantasy points against this same Charlotte team 2 games ago. He's very inconsistent. His minutes fluctuate, but it is a great spot, of course, against Charlotte once again. Derek Favors could be a total steal if he comes in versus Milwaukee, who also struggles a little bit versus centers, especially rebounding. He could be the steal of the night at 4.8 if he has no restrictions and is playing. I'm sure he's already been, basically, they already said he's playing. Just don't know what the minutes will look like. He hasn't been out for injury. He's, been dealing with the death of his stepmother or mother, something like that. So, sorry to hear that, obviously. But, again, could be a major spot here for Favors at 4.8K versus Milwaukee if he is going to be playing a full allotment of minutes. Avaka Zubac at very cheap. I didn't even write his price down because I was worried about the minutes. He's played 21 or more minutes in his last 3. He's put up some really nice fantasy points game over those couples. We know he's a fantasy point per minute beast. Of course, he gets that Brooklyn team. He's playing Toronto. So I think they might play him a little bit more tonight against Gasol. So Zubac is interesting. Last but not least, I'm sorry, that's what it was. He put up 28 and 33 in his last 2 of 3. Playing 21 minutes. So that kind of goes to show you what kind of production he can put up. All right, so this pod's been 23 minutes, all 11 games covered. Hopefully you guys got everything you needed. I got to get my ass to work, so you guys enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and let's talk basketball.